Hi folks, I'm your host Charles Braun, and this is Go-to-Market Hackers, the show where we go inside the minds of go-to-market engineers and revenue architects, designing systems that deliver winning outcomes. So before I turn to our awesome guest today, I'll say a few words about myself. I'm a SaaS founder with over 10 years of experience scaling go-to-market teams across various VC-backed startups. And what I always find fascinating is understanding the best practices when it comes to building the systems to scale these go-to-market teams. And so this is what this podcast is about. It's about understanding how the best GTM teams are combining the tools and the processes to deliver outstanding growth. And today's guest is Oriol Serra, the founder of Conversion Architects. Oriol is a systems thinker who fell in love with Clay a couple of years ago and who now designs GTM systems for startups looking to accelerate their GTM. So Oriol, welcome to the podcast. We're happy to have you. Oriol, it's really great to have you on the pod today. Thanks so much for joining. I know you're traveling through South America, so I appreciate you being flexible here. Maybe what you can do is share a little bit about who you are, who's Oriol, and what is your background? How did you even get into GTM engineering? And I always like to ask this on the pod, what's your definition of a GTM engineer? Different folks have different definitions, and the scope is changing. The role of the GTM engineer is changing. So all that would be great. And then, of course, we'll love to dive into the stuff that you've been doing with the different clients you work with and best practices. Does that sound good?
Yeah, sounds good. I was born in Barcelona and I lived there my whole life until I was 18. I was ready to go to university and I moved to London for university and I studied computer science.
Right.
So I did a foundation degree there. I didn't end up doing the whole degree. I was halfway finishing my degree, actually doing the top up, but I got bored a bit and I decided to not do that anymore. My dad was not too happy about that. But I thought, hey, I need to do my own thing. I wasn't that happy there. I didn't feel like it was my thing. So I did a lot of odd jobs. I started being a customer service representative, had to speak to everyone around England. So I had to get used to really different accents really fast. That helped me stay on my feet and learn quick as well. And then I did a lot of sales jobs. And I kind of wriggled my way around doing random things and learning fast. So that
I saw you were in finance for a while, right?
Yeah.
So you tried a bunch of different things.
Yeah. What I was going to do with my life, I tried a bunch of things. I was always very entrepreneurial. So I tried different businesses. Almost none of them worked. Then I moved back to Barcelona a few years ago after almost 10 years in London with a project in my hands. I was doing some consulting for clients. Then I started my own company, which is the Conversion Architects. I started as a cold email agency at first. I thought, hey, I was an SDR. I was a sales manager as well. Like all these years, taught me how to do all that. About a year in, I decided to pivot to go more in the RevOps side, right? Because that was always kind of my calling without me even realizing. And then that's when the whole go-to-market engineering thing happened. Clay was already a lot more popular. I remember learning about Clay when it first launched. And then a few years later, I kind of started working with it. So I only started working with Clay about in 2023. So only 2.5 years ago now. I heard about it like a bit before that. I just didn't touch it because I thought it was too complicated back then. I learned Clay really fast thanks to my computer science background. It was easy for me to think in systems and think all that way before actually touching tools. And then you asked, what is a go-to-market engineer? To me, go-to-market engineering is a part of revenue operations, right? And people are also confused about what revenue operations are. So to me, it's basically, there's 3 teams in company, revenue teams. There's a sales team, a marketing team, and there's a customer success team, right? And from kind of the whole customer journey from one team to the very end, it starts with marketing, continues with sales, and ends up with customer success. Once they are already a customer and you have to take care of them, right? The problem I see in a lot of companies is they're completely disconnected, these 3 teams. So you have marketing that are trying to figure out what's the ICP at the very beginning when companies first launch, but even if when they're more mature, they're constantly redefining the ICP and understanding them better. They're launching campaigns, let's say ads or email campaigns sometimes. They're generating leads, right? And they pass them on to the sales team who obviously complain, saying these leads are really, really bad and I cannot close any of them. And then they blame marketing, right? The marketing gets frustrated because they're like, I mean, I thought that's what you needed. What's going on here? And they're not speaking to sales and sales is not really speaking to them. And then customer success is left with like all the crumbs of like, hey, now I got to deal with these like pseudo customers we have here without any of the context of what's happened throughout the process up until that point, right? So revenue operations solve that. They solve these kind of disconnect between all these teams, and they create systems that connect all the teams, share data across all teams, and automate all the stuff that should just be automated. That saves them time. So that's kind of what revenue operations do in a nutshell. Now, does that make sense when they see you?
I like what you said, which is around essentially, I don't want to call it miscommunications, but there are, between all these different departments, there are some walls. I mean, we obviously try to break down these walls and make sure that post-sales talks to pre-sales and marketing talks to sales, et cetera. But we have our different, we're measured differently in many cases. We have different mindsets. We have different languages.
Yeah.
And so it's really important that we all speak the same languages, that we all align on what is an SQL, what's an SAL, what's, all these kind of jargon words. To your point, the communication flows, and at the end of the day, everything is effective and efficient between these different orgs. So I like the way you kind of presented it, and I don't know if you're familiar with the Bowtie funnel, where they kind of talk about that, right? It's the same kind of framework, and I like it a lot. It makes sense.
Yeah, exactly, man. I worked in finance for a little bit. I saw that, and I saw same thing happening in the sales world, where people like to throw out fancy words out there, speaking with jargony words and technical words. At the end of the day, when you're saying streamlining, what do you mean by that? It's like, okay, I just want to simplify things, period.
Right.
When you say, I always try to simplify, like explaining what I do and how it works as much as possible, so that a 10-year-old could understand what I do, right? So yes, like all that you said, it's true. It's exactly the same thing we're both talking about. It's like they have three teams, are disconnected, not talking to each other. They're doing a lot of things that are just bloated. That means they're doing many more things that shouldn't be done. A lot of tasks that are a bit useless sometimes, and that could be simplified and automated as well.
I wonder to what extent what you're describing is also due to the fact that they're manual, meaning when you have things that are done that are manual and repetitive, they tend to have, frequent mistakes, which lead to misalignments between the different orgs. Automating them in many ways helps smooth that out if it's well automated. Obviously, you can optimize things in a bad way.
Yeah, 100%, man, 100%. And then you ask, what's a go-to-market engineer for you? Because that's kind of like a relatively new term. And then Clay said they coined it. Whoever coined it is relatively new. And to me, because everyone's confused about like what it is, right? Like I see a lot of people saying, I'm a go-to-market engineer, but all they do is outbound, essentially. So that's not a go-to-market engineer.
Yes.
That's like an outbound specialist to me. So to me, a go-to-market engineer, now that we've described what a RevOps team is, basically, the go-to-market engineer is a branch of that team. That's more of the experimental arm of that team, meaning he's a person or reduced group of people. So it's not a lot of people that are learning really fast all the new tools, trying to build new systems, implementing the new tools, seeing what works and what doesn't work, and reporting back to the RevOps teams and being like, okay, this is working really well. This is not. Let's implement this as a default system in the company. And
totally
takes that in the overall structure of the company and then maintains that system, right? And I see the go-to-market engineer as like the first guy in the line now as a scout, trying to find what's working, what's not, without having to mobilize the entire RevOps team. That would take a lot of resources and time. That's not really worth it. So it's better just have one.
Totally. The reason I started this podcast is because I saw that with AI, there was so much going on that GTM teams were confused in terms of how do I use AI? How do I leverage it in the best possible way in order to solve a lot of the problems we're talking about here? And so it's kind of to demystify, to share what different teams are doing, what different companies are doing. And so it's really great to be able to talk with the practitioners, folks like you that set up, the different strategies and then execute those strategies. And it's true that the go-to-market engineer, you talked about tools. It's really important that he or she knows the different tools that are, readily available in this new age of AI, how to leverage them, in the best way. I'm curious, you've been doing this now for many years, and maybe you can share what's the process for you, also helping the listeners that might not know where to start when it comes to injecting AI into their go-to-market efforts. At Conversion Architects, what's your process? When you start working with somebody, what do you start looking at or looking for? If you could start laying that out, the strategy, the process, and then of course, would love to dive into some examples.
Of course, man. So the first thing is just speaking to the team that I'm helping and seeing what they do, like the process, and simplifying as much as possible. The higher up market you go, the more corporate everything becomes. And what that means to me as a systems builder is the harder it is to understand what everyone is actually doing. They introduce a lot of technical words and jargon, and every company has slightly different definitions of what it means. So I first try to map what is each team doing from beginning to end, marketing, sales, and customer success in very simple words that we can all understand, like super easy to understand English, right? And then when I don't understand something, I ask, it's like, hey, what do you exactly mean by that? And I might look dumb sometimes, but I don't care because I really cannot create a flow chart to represent everything that the company is doing and the different things they're doing. So it's like, okay, marketing starts their day by doing this, this, and their whole flow looks exactly like this, that, and that, right? So I create a mirror flow chart, different boxes of what's going on, different processes. Then the leads generated by marketing go to sales, and that becomes like an MQL, right? If this exact thing happens, right? So that takes a few weeks at the beginning, and depending on how big the organization is, might take a little bit longer. But I first try to map all that and be very clear so that we all agree, right? And if there's like a slight disagreement, I like to tackle it because that's going to become a problem later. And then I go in and observe all that, thinking, okay, what here is useless, or what here is a process that's bloated and should not be here, right? Or what's a process that's being repeated by both marketing and sales is doing the exact same process, but they haven't been talking to each other, so they don't really know they've been repeating the same thing, right? So I analyze all these things and I go back to them and tell them, hey guys, I've seen this, and this that could be transformed into this system, that would automate all this stuff and essentially save you this many hours and make you this much more money. That's the first part of the process before I even start touching any tool. Like there's no point touching any tools before we really understand what's going on in the organization and kind of design a system for them. So that's the first point. So you may had a question.
It's pretty clear. If I just say it back, you come in very hands-on and consultative. I'm sure they provide also some documentations and their own playbooks, but you still dig into what are their, like how they set up the systems, how do they define the different terms and the different terminologies they might have. What do those handshakes look like between marketing, sales, customer success?
Yeah.
What are the friction points? You talked about systems design. So you basically understand how the system works. And then based on that, you start making recommendations around where to start. What are the priorities? I'm assuming they also tell you this is what we're hoping to achieve. We're hoping to achieve ABC. So maybe you kind of like readjust a little bit where you're focusing based on the gaps they've identified. Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah. So the way we work is with modules, and then we have separate modules for each of the kind of like systems that we built, and then we kind of group all these modules together in what would be like university degree style. We have a whole project, right? That's usually 6 months, and that's like, okay, with you we get to module 3 and module 4, right? We typically understand that before we start working with them because we have very good sales process. You know, we do a lot of project scoping before we sell anything to a client. But these will slightly change. Or we always tell them before we sell anything, we might need to change things up depending on what we actually see. Because people say one thing, discovery calls and like, discovery project calls and all that.
Right.
And then when you start working with them, it's a whole different story, which is fine. Companies are messy sometimes. That's why we help them in the first place. But it's not always static. So we have always the same kind of backbone structure of what we do, but we change things depending on the client. And the first phase is that, which is like another kind of, it's essentially another discovery, but once they're already inside the company. And then after that, we validate, okay, these which we thought we were going to be able to do, we can't because of this exact reason. Instead, we're going to do this other thing. Do you agree with this? Yes. Okay.
Makes sense.
Then we begin working. And we try to keep it super simple. Even when I'm speaking to you now, you might notice that I try to use a very simple language so that we all understand what we're talking about, even to the point where it sounds like I could speak to junior people and they would understand. That's kind of the goal always, keep everything super simple.
So I was going to point out that you were mentioning earlier that your dad wasn't very happy that you didn't finish your software engineering degree, but now you've become a teacher. You're putting together these modules and these chapters for your new pupils to start understanding how to structure their GTM. So it sounds like a good way to get back into teaching and learning.
Yeah, it's funny, man. I actually love teaching. I love it. That's why in everything we do, it's like
Nice.
we do that, we implement the system, then we always document. I'm so obsessed with documenting, man. Like, and it's going to say this, what I'm going to share now, like how I think about design systems and all that. And then we always coach the teams that we're helping. We coach them and we
Nice.
tell them this is exactly how we did this, how you can replicate it and all that, right? Because we want them to be self-sustaining. Like, obviously, they're always going
Got
to
it.
need our help, like in the near term, but long term,
Right.
ideally, it wanted to, I know it's not great for my business, but I wanted to churn eventually because we've done such a great job that they
Yep.
don't need us anymore, right? Or if not churn, to just be doing better things, other things that are not always the same, right? So we're not
Right.
maintaining and doing always the same stuff, right?
Makes
That's
sense.
how we've done a good job.
That's a great philosophy, and I completely agree with it. If a consultant works for years with the same company, they're just basically billing them by the hour and milking them. A good indicator of your efficiency and success is for them to grow up and go about their own lives. And of course, they can bring you back in for strategic initiatives, but yeah, totally agree with your philosophy.
Yeah. So let me share, if you don't mind, a slide of like, because it
Of
ties
course.
directly with what we were talking before about like systems building and go-to-market engineering and
Of
all
course.
that. We presented this at the State Lab Barcelona like a months ago, and this is kind of like the way I think about it, right? I explained in that event that I had a dreaded HCTLAP class that was called How to Think Like a Programmer, which was the first lesson I ever had in my computer science degree in London. And it had nothing to do with hard coding or using tools or really advanced stuff. It was more to do with how you actually think in systems and like a coder before you even start doing things. So it was a lot of knowing how to write pseudocode, knowing how to design systems with flowcharts and things like that, right? So that really stuck with me and
Love it.
helped me design this ladder. Everyone that starts like in a go-to-market engineering and they want to become GTMEs, they always start with tools for some reason. They always look at Clay and they look at MA10 and they look at all these tools and they're like, oh, this is really cool. Let me become proficient in these tools. And then they realize, okay, let me do some research because I actually don't know anything about these tools. I need to learn about them and then execute. After messing with it, they say, okay, I haven't designed any system really. So I don't really know what this workflow that I built does, or it works really well, but it's not useful to anyone, right? Or it's not really covering the important need that the company has, right? And they never really got to the point where they think in systems. So I always like to invert this ladder or this staircase all the way. I always start at the very top in systems thinking, right? So that's like what I explained before. The first phase of what we do with clients, it's always understanding the whole organization, how the whole revenue teams inside the org operate, and then understanding, is there anything we can implement that's going to help them? It's going to save them time. It's going to make them more money. It's going to save them money or something like that. Sometimes there's nothing. They're doing everything great. So there's no point in automating anything here. You should do this manually. For example, I know this because we've tried this. Using AI for all of your outreach, for everything, it's not a good idea. I've tried this myself. I know the good parts and the bad parts, but you should still have a human element in all the outreach you have, right? So I feel a lot of teams starting with outbound and trying to implement go-to-market engineering in outbound, and they try to automate everything, use AI for everything, right? Then it doesn't really work out well. Like you don't get that many replies. And the human element, people notice. People are not stupid. Like they notice when it's an AI or not. Unless you do it really, really well, of course, but you cannot always apply AI to everything in all your outreach, right? So in this case, systems thinking is essential because without it, you just do it without thinking. You would just apply AI to everything and then results never come. You think, oh, what happened, right? So you have to start here. And then I go to system design and let me see if I can show you. Here is a system design that I'm doing for a client. I want to share that screen soon. Let me revise if there is any confidential information. Okay, nothing. Perfect. So I'm doing it for a client in Spain, so it's all in Spanish. So sure, more secure as well. um, so so this is how I start everything. It's literally just like a Google document. right? It's like, okay, I want to do
Right.
the deep workflow of contacts and companies, right? So I kind of like, this is already the cleaned up SOPs, right? But I start everything with in here and I say, okay, what do you need to do? Like I need step one to be like collect all contacts from the CRM. I don't know, like super simple, right?
Mhm.
And then
Yeah.
step two, I need to import all the contacts into Play. Uh, can do
Mhm.
this with an API or manually. And then step three is
Mhm.
so I write down all of it from A to Z, what's going to need to happen in this system step by step, right? That's similar to the pseudocode in computer science. After all that,
Mhm.
I begin working. I'm like, okay, step one, I need to do all this. While I'm working, sometimes I will notice, oh, there is a sub step here, right? There is a sub step that I need to do this other thing, right? So I can complete this first step. So I write it down as well. And then maybe there's two sub steps, right? So another thing here. Then while I'm working on completing all the sub steps, I mark it as green and then green. And then the whole step becomes green, which is that's done already. And I move on to step two. At the end, you're going to have
Mhm.
a messy thing, but you're going to have maybe like 50 steps, all of them with all the sub steps. And then everything's completed. So you finish the system, right? Cool thing about that is
Mhm.
you will have created SOPs just by doing that. And it's also going to make it easier for you to work while you're working. Because let's say you finish step one, you go to sleep, next day you continue working, you forgot what you were doing, which table you were on, which workflow you were touching. If you have these,
Mhm.
you can directly go and read and like, oh, okay, I was here, I remember now. And also, if you have someone else in the team that's working with you on this, right, it's going to be a nightmare for them to understand, hey, like, what were you working on? Like, what's the last workflow you touched, right? They're going to have to review everything. Is going to be a nightmare, right? So if they have these, they can also read and continue working from where you left off. That is why it's super important to do it that way. And that is what I call system design. Design the system, writing step by step, everything. And then I move on to the execution. These three are actually in tandem. Execution, research, and tools actually go like on the same level. And then once you execute, like I explained right now, and then sometimes you get to a step which is like, I don't know how to do this. It's like maybe you need to use a tool that you never used, which is a great trait that go-to-market engineers should have, which is learning new things. There's new tools coming out all the time. I don't need to know them all. What I need to know though is what do I need to achieve solving that problem that the company has. As long as I know that, I can figure it out through research. What tool can I use to solve this? I can ask,
Mhm.
I can learn, I can read online. That's part of the research, which never stops. And then the tools is kind of like the testing, which is once you are executing, you're doing the research, you're using the different tools to achieve that. But it's just the name, it's a tool, literally. It's like a hammer. There's amazing tools that you can leverage and use, but it's not the most important thing. And I feel like everyone's getting caught in, I want to use Clay, I want to use NA10, I want to use these, it's the best, it's whatever. Yes, they are amazing tools. I love them all, but the most important thing is the way you think and the way you reason. And that's what makes a good go-to-market engineer in the way I see it. Does it make any sense?
It makes a lot of sense. This is what I liked when we talked kind of offline. I like that you are a systems thinker. And this is where, for me, the difference between GTM engineer and RevOps gets blurry, right? The folks
Yeah,
that I know in RevOps, they're a lot about the strategy and the systems planning.
I agree.
And on the other extreme, the GTM engineers know the tools inside out. They know how to create these complex clay workflows or N8N workflows that the RevOps leader or manager just could not do.
Yeah,
But being able to have those two parts of your brain, I think, is very powerful. And I think to be honest, that's what we're going towards. I think um, you cannot only be focused on the tools and the tech part. You need to be able to take a step back and say, okay, great, I'm building this engine to solve this specific task, but how does it fit into the bigger picture? And how does it feed into other data flows or impact marketing? So again, I think this is the best way to adopt these optimizations and to bake in this AI first mindset into the GTM org. It's really
yeah,
thinking of it from a systems perspective before just diving in and just executing on the strategies and the tools.
yeah, exactly. And you're right, man. RevOps is usually a little bit, more maybe abstract, you could call it. I mean, depending on the role, because there's
Right,
also like
right,
more like the revenue specialist, which is like more doing stuff. And then you have the higher up people that are usually more
right.
just thinking more abstractly. But yeah, you're right there. The one thing I always see as well is organization. People are so messy, and especially it makes sense because people are good go-to-market engineers. Sometimes they're not that organized. They learn a lot of things, but they're more. You could be called them artistic, right? Sometimes, which is like they learn
Right.
all these new things and they want to implement them fast and they don't want to wait. And usually that creates mess behind, right? So I'm always very obsessed with organization, tidying things up, SOPs, all documentation, creating videos, because I have also seen, not only the RevOps side, but I have also seen people that just create a mess. And sometimes it is to their own benefit, because the more of a mess they
Right.
create, the less they can be fired, which is also a huge problem for companies, right? When they're thinking, we have an individual, we have a group of people creating these systems for us, which is great, but all they're doing is just create more mess, right? So that's also something to look out for. If you have
Totally.
if you are focused on, I want to create a system that only I can manage, is not that great for organization. You should create systems that anyone, even a very junior person, could understand and manage eventually.
Right. Makes sense. So should we dive into some more examples of how you're executing these?
Yeah, let's do it, man. All right, so I can show you a quick play workflow for just like super simple workflow for outbound. So I'm gonna go with like the typical play, which is outbound, right? I don't typically touch that with clients. I touch all the things around it, but I don't launch campaigns. We used to do that before. Let me show you a bit of a workflow, just like does the kind of like list building part and like pushing someone to a campaign side of things. So this is super simple for everyone in this space, but for someone who's not in this space, it's going to be useful to see. So the display, it looks like an Excel spreadsheet, and then you have different columns, and then you can fill in data, you can manipulate the data any way you want. For someone that doesn't know Play, the best way to explain it, or at least the best way that I understand it, is a train station where you have data wagons, like trains coming in, and it's data, you can manipulate it any way you want. And then you have also data coming out from that train station anywhere you want. For example, you can create a list of prospects, you can clean them up, and then you can make that train depart to HubSpot, for example, or you can make it depart to Smartly to send emails or whatever, right? So it's a place that's like an exchange kind of place where things come in, things happen, and things leave in a very simplistic way. So here the problem, okay, is minding your typical SDR team and marketing teams, right? So SDRs would need to, if their marketing team doesn't do it, depending on the company, marketing builds the lists for the SDRs. But when
Okay.
I saw some companies that do that. But when I was an SDR, I had to build my own lists, right? Sometimes I would get given
Right.
lists of accounts to prospect, but a lot of times was like, just build your own list. And that's it. So that's the
Totally.
problem, because I first need to.
It's fun.
Go on.
It's funny because even if I look back to some of the roles I had where I was VP sales, it's almost as if marketing didn't really want to know who I was going after. I had our BDR team hunting all these accounts. Now, obviously, we had our target accounts that we would align with marketing on, but marketing was more like, hey, there's usage of some tools and some scraping that wasn't very, let's say, kosher. And we were doing a lot of gray stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can imagine how marketing may or may not want to provide the lists depending on the use cases. This goes back to our earlier conversation around the walls that sometimes tend to be built between these different orgs, which isn't a good thing, just to be clear, but
Yeah.
they do tend to be, put up.
Yeah. And the problem with that as well is it wants to keep everything very nice and tidy, right? That slows down sales as well, because it's like sales wants speed. And then if you have a rep saying it's like, oh, but we need to make sure systems stay intact, whatever, that kind of slows things down, right? So to me, the solution to that is, why not just automate all that? Let's just automate all the list buildings. So everything's like you're constantly scraping new leads, new accounts, constantly
Yeah.
depending on you constantly validating them with the system, constantly checking on the CRM. Is this account already, has it been touched? Is it an old account? Can we touch it again? Can we not? And then constantly routing it to different reps. Like you can route them directly to reps, and you don't need to have the reps doing the scraping using Lucia for free, and then you run out of the free credits and you need to use Zoom info free credits or whatever, right? Like, which this is a perfect example of how tools like Clay can solve that. You can build a table or a set of tables that on a schedule constantly are scraping things for you, right? Just to be clear, Play is not a data. They do provide their own data, but they have partners with like data providers. They're not a data provider per se, and I don't essentially recommend using Play data for a lot of things because they are partnering with just a few data providers, but there are other better data providers out there that not only Play. Okay, so it might work really well for your specific use case, but for example, if you need to target companies in the US too, it's going to be difficult. Just FYI. But anyway, what we do here is we find the companies here, right? So this is a find function instead of Clay. We just set typical kind of like filters, right? Like find me anyone in the United States that's publicly held, software development companies, size 10, and 25,000 companies maximum. And then it just populates everything, right? You have the company name, description, industry, right? Then what we do here is we are checking accounts in HubSpot via API. So we're running an API and being like, hey, is this account in our HubSpot already? Right? And if it is, we can check further, like, how did the account be engaged? Are there any notes in this account? Is there any owner assigned to this account, etc., etc., etc. That's part of an automated system that constantly checks that. If it's like, no, there's 0 accounts in HubSpot, it's like, cool, we're ready to go, right? It's like, okay, is this, B2B or B2C? And can you fully determine this, right? That's an AI step that checks that. And then, yeah, it's B2B or B2C or cannot determine, so might as well not engage right now. And we can pass this one, for example, to another second filter if we're interested in not losing any accounts here, right? Then we do another AI step that's like checking if it's my SCP, right? Only if it's B2B at least, right? Because we're only interested in B2B, depending on a set of conditions of our SCP. And then it checks the website, but it also does Google search and a few other things. It's like, yes, okay, it is ICP for us. Perfect. Then we want to normalize the name. So we'll use that normalized name.
What does that mean, normalize? Oh, normalized name, like if a company has multiple names or subsidiaries or things like that?
Yeah, great question. Normalizing name is exactly that. If you have Apple Inc., for example, getting rid of the Inc.
Yep.
So in case you want to name drop that company in an email, you're not going to say
that makes
Apple
sense.
Inc.,
That makes sense.
It's weird, right?
Yeah.
Perfect, I normalize it. So this workflow per se, I didn't build it. Someone in my team built it. But the way I do it is even a bit more extreme than this. So here you see it's like no star with like the S, that's capital S, right? So I like to do it in a more human way. Okay, so like this is great, by the way, and a lot of companies like it that way. A lot of companies want it to be name dropped like that, but sometimes it's like, how do you actually say that company? It's like, would you actually put the capital S or would you not? Or would you just say, if you're typing in your phone, would you say Apple with a capital A or without it? Right. So I try to think this before I actually normalize companies to think how would a human actually say that, right? And I always go very informal, which some people are not happy about it because they're like, oh, it's too informal or whatever, but that's just my style. So what we do is we search for people as well, which we have in another table. Once a company is ICP, so it's B2B, it's ICP, we normalize it, all that. Okay, we search for different people. And then we have different tables with different people that we have searched. In this case, we have newly hired people. That's like under 10 months ago for us. And then in here, we can then, we have the person here, which directly relates. This is data pushed from the other tables. And then we have full name, first name, last name. Then we have the LinkedIn profile, right? And then we have the data. So this is linking the data from the other tables, from the company table. And we can pull any of the data points or columns we had in the other table inside of this other table now. So if we click here, we can find all these other things we had in the other tables, so we can add this.
Just so I understand, here you have multiple contacts per company. Are you looking for specific titles within those companies? The company fits ICP, less than 50 or between 10 and 50 employees. And then within that, presumably you're looking for a specific title or seniority, whatever. And that's why you have multiple contacts per company.
Exactly. So you can set up filters in here again, like we set up these ones in this case,
Yep.
right? It's like, hey, you can set up filters in here. But what you'll notice if you do search on Play directly instead of Sales Navigator, that there are a lot less filters inside of Play than Sales Navigator, right?
Right. Right.
So
Totally.
people
Yeah.
think, why would I use Play or not? It's actually Play trying to incentivize you to get as much data as possible to begin with, and then refine it through the different enrichments they have. So, for example, instead of trying to filter everything from the get go, they want to give you more data for you to use then AI and filter it with AI, right?
That makes sense.
Filters.
Can I ask also the underlying mechanics that are going behind the scene here? You are pulling this data from, you said this, you're not using Clay's native data. You are pulling it from what, like an Apollo or something like that? And
No,
then,
so
and then are you?
Yeah, so so in this case, we are using it directly from Clay. Like in this case, we are.
Okay.
And then the way Clay works is to provide you that data. They are in partnership with data providers to feed you data directly inside of Clay. That is not personally my favorite way of doing it. My favorite way of doing it is, depending on the data I'm trying to find, I have a specific provider for that, right? So I know, hey, if I want to find CFOs in the United States, they're most likely going to have LinkedIn. The best place to find them is Sales Navigator. Like that's going to be 100% the best place. So I would prefer going through Sales Navigator or even using a scraper that scrapes Sales Navigator, which is a bit of in the gray zone.
I was going to say going through Appify or something, and then makes sense.
You don't need to pay for all of that, but it's a bit of a gray area. But again, like Clay is the best at molding data. It's not inherently the best at providing the data.
And then you started out this example by saying that this is for an outbound campaign, but it sounds like you're also maybe pushing this to a CRM. Is that correct? Because you're collecting this data.
At the same time, you are checking if this company is in the CRM, and then what you can do is you can even score the different leads here. So let's say like this is going to a traditional SDR team, right? You could even score different leads in here, depending on whatever scoring model that you have. You could even have RB2B, for example, checking your website visitors and then comparing that against the RB2B data. It's like, hey, is Michael Pedalino here the person who has checked our website, or has his company checked the website in the past, let's say, 2 weeks, right? And then if so, that's a higher score, meaning I want to send this to my best reps because it has a higher probability of converting, right? You can do that directly here as well. You can directly route it to a specific rep from here as well. Or you can just directly push it to a campaign like Smarting, which we do in this case, that sends that directly to a campaign that sends emails automatically. And of course, you can then check this lead if it's on HubSpot or Salesforce or whatever CRM you use. And if it's, you can create it automatically via the APIs. And then, or if it's there, you can update the information there as well. So
makes sense.
The amount of things you can do is kind of like unlimited. It's about knowing exactly what you want to do before. That's why designing the system and writing out the steps, it's really, really important, because then it's really hard to, obviously now I know this is a very simple workflow for me and I've been using it for a long time. But for someone that's really starting at the very beginning, it's going to be so messy to look at this and think, okay, what do I do next? I don't know what to do, how to add next. I don't know what to do next, right? And it's a lot simpler to do if you have to document with all the steps that you lined up before. So you just know, hey, I need to do step 2 now. I don't know how to do that, but I know it has to do with this step and play somehow. So let me figure that out, which becomes a lot easier.
Makes sense. Can I ask, Oriol, I know we talked about tools and the fact that the tools are the last piece of this whole puzzle. If you were to kind of advise somebody like, there's a founder who's starting out and they're 5 people and they're like, okay, now everything's in a Google sheet. Now we have to have a proper CRM and we have to have, a tool for outbound. Like, I like to think of it as what's easiest to integrate. For example, Salesforce is a beast. I've used them many years, but I wouldn't recommend them anymore because it's so much of a heavy lift and everything you want to do is complicated, versus HubSpot, which is easier. I've heard a lot of good things about Attio, which is obviously the newer kind of AI CRM. But is there like one that you'd recommend for founders or startups that are starting out and want something fairly lean and easy to use?
We use HubSpot personally. It's just like simple views
Yeah.
of like all the automations inside. I know there's a lot of critics of HubSpot out there, which is fine. I know the founder as well. So they try to make a CRM that's more oriented towards sales and the reps. It's more user friendly towards the reps, who's ultimately the goal is for them to use it, right? Because a lot of CRMs are not very user friendly for them. A lot of reps complain that it's not really friendly, even if it's a lot simpler in Salesforce. It's a drag to have to update everything and all
Yeah.
that, right?
Makes sense.
We use that. Play for me is a must-have tool for sure.
For sure.
Actually, if you're dealing with data, right? Like data processes, Play is 100% a must-have tool. Then if you're dealing more with like you want to automate a specific process that's not necessarily to do with lots of data, like creating a list or like cleaning up a CRM or things like that, NA10 is going to be better for you. So think about Zapier or make.com.
Right.
That's going to be the light version of NA10. So any process you want to automate in the company, from like classifying your emails to more complex things like RevOps processes, you can do inside of NA10, which is also like a great tool.
Makes sense.
A little bit harder to use than Play. But yeah, I would say to get started for sure Play, because you're gonna be able to automate a lot of the processes that you currently have. But again, before doing any of that, thinking systems and all that, I'm annoying with that, I know, but
Totally.
it's
And like the last podcast we recorded, my friend was saying she went extreme. She was like, all the tools can do pretty much the same things if you torture them. So she's like, I don't care about the tools. That was kind of her thing. But that I think is the extreme. I know that personally there are some tools that I prefer and I wouldn't recommend even to my worst enemies. But yeah, I totally agree that processes and mapping out the entire org before getting into the very specific details of the tools makes sense.
There's another reason why that's more important to learn than the actual tools. If you think about it, we are going from more technical, specific, niche knowledge you needed to have before to more mass market, easier to use, less of a technical niche knowledge you need to have to use these things, right? For example, vibe coding, all these things, right? I know it doesn't replace coders nowadays, but it will eventually, when it becomes good enough, is we just have an AI that will produce whatever we want to consume or whatever we need, right? So instead of having an application that does this specific thing, like an app on the phone or whatever, we're going to have AI and we tell it, we need this specific thing. And it's going to create an app that's customized for us, specifically what we need for that specific moment, right? That's what I think we are headed to. It's like a similar comparison to like airplanes, right? Before you need to know everything about the airplane, right? Now it's more about learning the systems, learning the processes, learning how to manage the autopilot of a plane to become a pilot, rather than knowing how to manually operate everything, right? So in a world that's
100%.
constantly going towards more automation, more of like voice command things, like I don't need to know how to code anymore. I can just say it out loud and it happens.
Totally.
Thinking systems becomes more and more important, because if you don't know how to use that, or if you don't know what's going on, it's going to be the same as a pilot that's experienced or someone that knows what the thing is actually doing and then can leverage kind of the automation to their advantage. So it's going to be even more important, right? It's like someone that vibe codes but doesn't patch vulnerabilities. It's the same thing. Someone that knows how to code really well is going to always be
100%.
someone that's learned that.
And I will say, at the end of the day, I do consider this almost like a sub-discipline, a lighter discipline of engineering. The same kind of guidelines apply to engineering. I've launched many startups in the past, and God knows that the mistakes you made is building a product and over-engineering a tool that eventually nobody uses. So you better make sure that you really understand the whole architecture and the system before committing 100 hours or 30 hours to building a specific workflow automation tool that is going to be obsolete after 3 months because you didn't realize that there was this piece of the puzzle that wasn't being considered, or whatever the case. So I completely agree and relate to what you're saying.
Yeah, 100%, man. It happened to me as well. That's how I know. When people ask me, because I had people in my team or friends or whatever, they ask me, how did you do a specific thing? And I solved their problem they've been trying to crack for a week in like 2 minutes. They're looking at me like I'm a genius. But in reality, I just spent tens and tens of hundreds of hours trying to crack it, looking like an idiot. And then finally figuring it out. I mean, like, that's also a thing. Making a lot of mistakes fast does help me a lot to learn.
Definitely. So we just looked at this great example for an outbound kind of setup. Is there another kind of example you want to walk through, which is in a different context? So not in the traditional outbound, but another cool use case or process that you've set up to optimize that you want to talk about?
We can show you the deduplication workflow that we built. I got a lot of criticism for this one, which is great. Means like we did a good job. But so the problem was we had a client that had a lot of duplicates inside of HubSpot. That was for HubSpot, okay? So it's easier, I think.
Right.
But we had a client that had a lot of duplicates, right? And then we tried to solve it with first looked at HubSpot and how they do. They even have a lot of like really cool tools inside of HubSpot to deal with that, but it wasn't that great. The level of detail or granularity you could go into building that system wasn't that advanced. And then we also looked at other tools like SaaS platforms that give data for you and all that, but it wasn't that custom, depending on what type of data they have, where do they have most duplicates and all that, right? So we built actually a workflow that essentially grabs all the contacts and companies in a CSV and we import it manually into Clay. We can do that via API as well, by the way, but this was for smaller clients, which have up to 100,000 records in their CRM, so it's not really big. We have a Clay table that preps the companies and one that preps the contacts. Once it pushes the data, once it's prepped to another table that does the merge, executes a merge of all the duplicates. And then we even built a last table that restores, merges in case you messed up and you merged two contacts that were not supposed to be merged. It fully restores that with a few tricks that we found we could do. But essentially, the context prep data, what it does is you input and you have all the data that you have, and then it goes through different tiers, right? And it checks, is there anyone else that has the same exact email, right? So that's a tier one. It's like, okay, that's 100%, almost 100% a duplicate, right? And then it goes 6 tiers. Email check, full name plus email domain check, full name plus company domain, company name, full name plus phone number, full name plus mobile, and it goes through different
This
checks.
is awesome.
Thanks, man.
It's funny. It's funny because I'm sure for a lot of people this sounds incredibly dry and boring, but this is something that I've faced as VP sales. We were scratching our heads for weeks trying to create systems and automations to deduplicate a lot of records.
Yeah.
And this is just beautiful. Like, it's amazing.
Yeah. Thanks. It's a lot of hours put in here, but once it's built, you can reuse it, many times. It's built internally. You can even, for different client, we change things obviously because each client is different, but it's not that we have to rebuild the whole thing, right?
Right.
How this works is this looks into the same table, which is a very simple way of doing it. Instead of doing a lookup enrichment display that essentially looks in the same table, if there's anyone like that, you could do an API check that looks into HubSpot, into CRM or whatever. So you can make it more complicated. This is the simple version. But once you have, it classifies it into like, okay, this is a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, right? You have the final merge tier here. And then you also select the primary contact ID. In this case, for this client, we selected it for the contact that was the most recently updated. But other companies have a different set of rules. For example, they have contacts tied up to different billing software or project management software. For them, the primary contact should be the contact that's most tied to all these different other tools they use. It doesn't really matter anyway, because the way HubSpot operates, it doesn't get rid of any associations, but just out of safety. And then we write all this data into the next table. And then in here, we execute the merge essentially. So we collect all the associations, all the engagements that this contact specifically has. For example, you merge the contacts that weren't supposed to be merged. That's how we are able to restore them. We essentially unassociate all of these things that we have from the secondary contact into the primary, create another contact, reassociate everything back into it. So it's as if nothing ever happened. But essentially, we execute the merge and everything's done automatically. Everything happens automatically. So if they have, in this case, like 3.2K, all of it is done automatically, right? It takes under an hour. We can run it once a quarter and it's like problem solved. So that's kind of another thing that I like, that kind of stuff more.
I love it. It's a great one. And I will say, if you're willing to share a simplified version of this with the audience, I'm sure they'll be super psyched about it. It's like one of these stupid issues that should be native to a lot of these CRMs.
Yeah.
As you said, it's never easy. I've gone through many instances where we had to do these simple tasks and it could take 2 weeks just to get it right. So very, very cool. I like it.
Thanks, man. Yeah, that's the kind of stuff we do, right? It's like we do the boring stuff that nobody really wants to do, but it's very important. And once you have that, it impacts revenue directly, right? Because let's say you launch a campaign and you had a ton of duplicates and you were messaging people twice without even realizing, right? That's suddenly it's gone because they realize it's all automated. They don't even know what they're doing. I don't want to engage with them, right?
Right.
Once you have your data clean, which is the first layer, which you always have to have before you do anything else in the process, you get higher revenue, impact a lot of things. So we can do all the systems that like make sure that you have more meetings shown, which is directly tied to more revenue. So all these boring things always lead up to saving a ton of time, which essentially means making money.
It's the boring things that matter, though. That's where, you're able to take advantage of the benefits of automation, right? It's in the small details that you're able to have those incremental marginal wins, basically. So I think it makes a ton of sense. So how do you typically start working with startups? Who is your ICP? Like, who is typically the startups that work with you? And how can people find you?
Yeah, sure. So we usually work with tech companies in the United States. We do a lot of SaaS as well, but it's not always that. We have some telecom clients as well.
Nice.
They also, a lot of times they do more of the boring stuff, which is great, right? Great companies do boring stuff. I love these type of companies, but it's usually technology oriented. The reason why is these companies are usually very new, or usually seeing very new tools to the market. And usually technology companies, specifically in the United States, are more open to trying these things and implementing these and challenging their own preconceived notions of things, right? We also work in Europe, like we work in Spain, we work in the UK, Nordics, but it is harder for us to work with these companies at this current stage where we are at, because they have their mindset and the way they operate more set in stone compared to American companies. That's our personal experience, and we mostly work with them and can have a faster impact with technology companies as well. People can find us at theconversionarchitects.com. That's our website, or just on LinkedIn. It's Oriol, Oriol, Serra, Serra. I'm there posting almost every day. If anyone has a question, or if they thought my time here was too technical and they'd like more simplified things, they can always DM me there.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. No, I think this is great, but you're right. We did go down into the weeds. I want to be able to do both in these episodes where you go high level, you talk strategy, but you're also able to go down into the details. At the end of the day, the folks who listen are founders or RevOps or go-to-market leads that are trying to learn how to scale efficiently and solve a lot of bottlenecks that the orgs have. And so I think it's really helpful to cover all those different bases. It's really great to be able to dive into all that with you. Thanks again for your time, and we'll see you around.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Oriol.